Go. Hey guys, I'm excited. I got reignited with a friend of mine, Adam Formal, which we went to Rutgers together. You have a very impressive background with a lot of interesting stories. We caught up the other day, and I'm excited to. So you're a clinical psychologist.
hmm
You have your PhD, your master's. You went to Rutgers for your bachelor's,
hmm
and you work with very very famous athletes. And yeah, I feel like you have a very interesting background.
Thank you.
Yeah. So before we get into all that, like, what made you want to get into becoming a clinical psychologist in the first place?
That's a great question. Back when I was in undergrad, I actually didn't have the thought of going into psychology at all. I thought I was going to be in business. I went to pre-business, and it wasn't until I took a class that I thought was going to be an easy A. Uh, it was abnormal psychology that I sat in on the course, and I was captivated by the very first lecture. I sat there listening to the professor at the time, his name is George Atwood, give a clinical case example of when he uh, was working with a patient. And what was so interesting to me about it was he was able to take the patient's life history and make it approachable or relatable, being able to take something that's so foreign from our everyday experience and be able to empathize with that person, even though their behaviors might have been so inconsistent with what many of us are used to seeing on a day-to-day basis.
Hmm. And through all of your training, working in hospitals, working with very interesting characters, that's one way to put it. Could you share about a time, or maybe like a life changing moment, or like a really rewarding moment you had with a patient that you were able to help?
Really rewarding moment. So, my work uh, spans a variety of different things that I do. And sometimes those things can be very abstract about helping someone deeply emotionally. But other times, those things can be just very basic things that someone is struggling with that are very tangible. So, one example was I had a patient who was struggling with their ability to cope with the heat. It was a hot summer in New York, and I helped the patient um, send in information to be able to get um, a free air conditioner. And so what that means when you're living in an apartment with 107 degrees, to be able to have air conditioning makes life a lot easier and a lot easier to cope. And this patient was also struggling with substance use and a variety of other issues. And so to be able to make that part of their life that much easier made it easier for them to be able to cope in a variety of other life domains. And so it has some of these like multiplier effects to it that one might not even consider.
Yeah, yeah, and I know I was watching New Amsterdam, and I remember there's been times where I'm sure you're in what most people would perceive as like dangerous conditions, or you're surrounded by people that are have gone through a lot in life. What do you have any stories about like funny interactions when you were going to school or anything like that?
How much time do we have, Davidson?
We have plenty of time.
Okay. Um, so I remember very distinctly my first semester in graduate school. I was placed on an inpatient unit in a hospital. So that's, for context, that's a locked in unit where people are there mostly against their will. And I was a co-leader running group therapy on a weekly basis in the unit as part of my responsibilities. And so every day a list would be posted by the nurses station saying which patients were allowed to go to group. And it is assumed that the patients that are not on the list were not allowed to go to group, mostly because they were deemed not to be in a stable enough condition to derive benefit from going to group. So Uh, I would go over to the posted list every day, and I would write down the names and then recruit patients to go into the group. So one day, this was maybe only a couple months into my graduate education. Um, and for those who don't know me, I'm all of 5'6" on a good day. Um, and so a patient roughly a foot taller than me came over to me and leaned over and whispered into my ear, "What's the difference between patients and therapists?" And at this point, I had many things running through my mind, most of them being about my safety and not so much about the content of what this person was saying. But I don't know why, but I answered, "What?" Uh, very nervous about what the answer was going to be. And so he leaned over again and said, "The patients get better." Now, keep in mind that, yes, this is maybe the funniest psychology joke I've ever heard in my life. But at the time, I was still so scared and processing what was going on that it didn't fully hit me. So I said, "Oh, okay," to the patient. And then I walked away. And then a few seconds later, it finally registered to me what what the patient was saying. And I started laughing. And on the other side of the hall, two patients were looking at me. And one patient looked at the other and said, "And they call us crazy." So it's one of those kinds of experiences that can only happen in this kind of environment. And a lot of people think of a psychiatric inpatient unit as a really chaotic environment, a really scary environment, but it really does run the whole spectrum of the emotions. And part of the beautiful uh, stuff about actually working in that kind of milieu is you get the whole spectrum of human life.
That's deep. So that segues nicely into my next question. So you work with, I'm sure you have a very huge spectrum, like high performers, like folks that are managing. I'm assuming billions and billions of dollars, right? On one end, right? Society would deem them as very very successful.
Mm-hmm.
Like I want my kids to get to that level one day, right? Whether that's like they get to travel the world or they get to live in nice penthouses, right? And then on the other end of the spectrum, you have folks that have gone through a lot in life. Maybe they weren't born with as many resources, right? So let's talk about the high performing executive slash fund manager first, right?
Sure.
Like I would imagine they have a lot of pressure that they have to, right? Are there any common things that you notice that they struggle with? Like, what are some of the most common, either um do they have like performance anxiety? Are
Mm.
they like always thinking about the future? What is that like?
So if I'm understanding your question, it's about what are the common problems and features of
Yeah,
these kinds of individuals?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Um, so I'll paint with a broad brush because folks can be so different. But some of the things that I've seen can include, in terms of problems that come up, uh, how unprepared folks can be from being a good performer as an individual contributor versus what that means to take the next step as a manager. Because when you are used to performing really well, it's hard to let go of the reins and let someone else do something if you feel you can do it better than them. And so that balancing act comes into play where you have to think about, even if I might be better than another person at an individual task, what it means for me to use my highest and best use of my skills and allow someone else to take on part of the work. And so the biggest and most um, impressive projects tend to be ones where you have to work with other people, that it isn't just one person doing everything by themselves. And so being able to let go of the reins and know how to talk to other people as opposed to just performing yourself is a huge part of that role.
Interesting. That's a pretty deep topic. Being in business, I would say the last 16 years of my life, so it's interesting because they tend to promote high performers, right? Which they're really good at their job, right? What they were hired to do. Now they're tasked with all these new responsibilities, like you said, letting go of the reins, like delegation or just control seems to be the common theme here.
Yeah.
Um, so how does one like finally let give control to whether it's their employees or their executive assistant or just like what are some practices that they can take?
I think first and foremost is recognizing um, what you're best at, where you can produce the most, what is your highest and best use. That yes, you can do a lot of different things, that the capacity is there, but when there's a limited amount of time in the day, being able to say, how do I get the most out of myself? And what does that mean that I have to let go of with others? And I think also a large part of that is about, in addition to knowing yourself and knowing your relative strengths and shortcomings, is being able to understand that in the others, how you
Mm,
set other people up for success.
mm,
Because if you give people tasks that either they don't like, they're not motivated to do,
mm,
or they don't have capacity at the moment,
mm,
and it isn't, a bridgeable gap,
mm,
um, then they're likely not going to succeed. And
mm,
so how much you really take the time to know who it is that's working for you, and how you can put them in a position to really grow themselves,
mm,
is a very different skill.
mm. So, it sounds like you help you support a wide variety. Like, are some of these folks like executives, or they have multiple tiers underneath them, or are they people manager? And do you also support like individual contributors? Maybe they're like a stockbroker or something like that. Is all across the board.
Yeah, it spans the whole gamut. I've worked with partners at law firms, hedge fund managers, etc.
Mm,
And so it is different, and it is different to see what happens as someone um, grows within their career, how the responsibilities change,
mm,
how it becomes more about managing and less about individual contribution.
mm,
And that is the part of um, taking on more responsibility, is that at a certain point, that responsibility includes what it means to um, work with others.
mm. Do you see some high performers that get into management? Do they sometimes go back into being an individual contributor, whether it's they're better suited for that, or they just have a realization like, hey, like I actually enjoyed having more freedom and more autonomy, or more less of the people management aspect of things.
Definitely. But I think that takes a lot of introspection on
Mm,
oneself to recognize, well, what are the things that I want to be doing on a
mm,
regular basis? What am I intrinsically motivated to do?
mm,
What are those things that um, make me feel excited to get up every day? What makes me um, feel a sense of accomplishment,
mm,
as opposed to a sense of burnout or feeling like exhausted and not in a good way at the end of the
mm.
day?
Interesting. So do you feel like, because I think a lot of us, we think high performers like they have to put on, especially partners of law firms, right? Like as a leader, you're not supposed to show emotion. You're supposed to be like, especially when the ship is rocky or there's turmoil, there's something going on, whether it's macroeconomics or there's just been layoffs, etc.
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel like because they have to, because maybe I'm biased, but I actually can relate more with leaders who can be vulnerable and are honest and be like, hey, like I'm trying to figure it out, I'm struggling right now, versus the ones that just put up a front and they're just like, hey, like everything will be fine, rah rah, right? Like, what are your like, are you seeing that leaders at that level, they're more likely to actually like they have to put on sort of this like everything is cool because I have to be like the rock or else everything else will crumble?
I think that there are a lot of really effective leadership styles, but I think that also depends on the match between leadership and the employees that they're working with. What
Mm,
folks, I think, to your point about those like rigid, more stoic types,
mm,
that I think there is a process that occurs in um, taking an initial message and turning it into something more palatable that other people can hear, and how to think about it and frame it in a way in terms of one's locus of control, what the employees can do to make things better as opposed to what is outside of their control. And so I think that messaging is really important and how it is conveyed. And so being able to temper things down so that it isn't unnecessarily stoking anxiety. But I think that there can certainly be room for employers to be more authentic, and that is part of a leadership style that people can be inspired by and connect to more deeply than someone who is more stoic.
That's a good point, right? With I'll call it the Andrew Tate movement, right? I feel like there's a lot of these, and I'm not gonna lie, like I have some employees that are go by like the Tate philosophy that I would say are more stoic, and they're like, no, just tough it out, and like, no excuses, like rah rah, like don't you have no time for emotions and stuff like that, right? To be more specific, like I had an ex housemate that committed suicide recently, and I was just kind of sharing like, oh, I'm a little bit off today, and some of them were like, dude, like no one has time to like be in your feelings, like you got to execute, you got to execute, like there's no time dwelling, and I'm just like, whoa, like, dude, like it's been like literally a day, like I can take my time, like this is like something that is in some ways helping me be more intentional because I just don't know how much time I have left, right? So I didn't agree with that, but I do think there's a whole new generation because Andrew Tate is such a strong influential figure, right? I'm worried that that's going to be more common, right? Where people are just like, well, I'm a man, like there's no time to be in my feelings and all this like bull crap, right? But I'm like, no, actually, I think it's healthy to actually process it, take the time, be intentional about like, okay, what's your legacy, and actually feel it, or just give gratitude, like, hey, that happened with, I'm glad we had the experiences we had, and I'm not going to dwell on it forever, but I still think it's healthy to process it.
Um, Davidson, first and foremost, I have to say I'm so sorry for your loss. That is a really profound and I imagine really painful experience. So I just wanted to acknowledge that.
Yeah.
And so in the nature of my work, uh, for a psychologist to say to bury feelings, um, it would be quite contradictory. So I think you're preaching very much to the choir here, in what it means to be able to use feelings, and so I'll tell you what I mean by that. Two things. One is that toughening up and batting down the hatches can be adaptive or maladaptive depending on the experience. And I'll say what I mean by that. So, for instance, if you have a surgeon on the battlefield, for him or her to recognize the human suffering um, that's in front of them and truly take all of that in, might render them unable to help the individuals that are there. And so dissociating in that moment as a defense, as a coping mechanism, is actually adaptive.
Right.
But for that same surgeon to go home and to be with their partner, and their partner gets into an argument with them and they dissociate, it's now maladaptive.
Wow.
And so being able to think about, one, when a coping strategy is adaptive versus maladaptive, as well as recognizing that we all have our limits. That, one definition of pathology that I really like is when the ability to cope is overwhelmed by stressors in the world. And that can all be relative to a person. Some people can have very low abilities to cope, but don't experience much stressors, and they're overall feeling okay. Other people can have tremendous capacities to cope, but things that happen are just so overwhelming, whether it be a war, a pandemic, um, upheavals of any kind, that that can be very damaging and upsetting and too much
Mm.
for anyone.
Yeah. I think what you're saying reminds me of it's interesting, right? Because like I grew up without a father most of my life, and in some ways I was able to like just bury it and like it's like dissociate. And I think with a lot of my friends, they come to me whenever they're going through like potential divorce or whatever, like whatever traumatic thing they're going through. And then sometimes like I'm just so exhausted by the end of the day that my wife will like most relationships with their spouses would just vent about what's going on at work, and then and then sometimes I'm just like, just tough it out, like why, or like try to problem solve, right? But it's like that's not why she's coming to me. She just wants to vent. So it's interesting. So I definitely could see how like in some ways I will kind of like dissociate when I'm with my wife, because I'm usually exhausted because I just had like 15 conversations with clients and people about like whatever issues they're dealing with, right? So I could see where I could be, that in that instance you call it maladaptive. I could see how in that particular instance, like, well, that didn't help our relationship, made it worse. So, but that's good to have language around it, right? Because now I can like be like, oh, okay, that was when I was being maladaptive, and I could choose like a different path. Yeah.
I think that is a huge part, and why I think about emotions as signals. I don't categorize them as good or bad, positive or negative, but I try to tune into what any individual emotion means. Because if someone is feeling sad, if someone is feeling angry, being able to tune into where that's coming from gives us an idea about how to frame it, how to think about it, and what our options are moving forward. But if we tune out, um, then oftentimes we lose sight of how to make things better in the long run. Um, Another example about the adaptive and maladaptive, for instance. Um, so, for instance, if I were to break my arm, I could take pain medication theoretically and just wait it out until my arm heals,
Mm.
and then I don't need it anymore.
Mm.
And so that is an adaptive use of pain medication,
Mm.
because I could say, it hurts, it prevents me from thinking about the other things that I want to do. And then by removing the pain of the hurt, I can still interact with the rest of my day without worrying about focusing on that pain.
Mm.
Whereas, for instance, if I procrastinate on, I don't know, studying for a test, like when I was in undergrad, for instance,
Mm-hmm.
that procrastinating doesn't help me pass the test anymore, right? So that's an example of where it's maladaptive, that
Right.
avoiding of the issue.
Yeah.
Whereas if I tune in to the underlying emotions, oh, I'm really stressed, I've got multiple finals, or I'm worried that I'm going to fail, what it means to tune into that suggests, oh, maybe I need to figure out a way to calm down a little, study and get back to studying, or study in a more manageable way, or think about how I am going to approach the studying, so that I am able to best accomplish what I'm looking to do. But that only happens when I really introspect. I tune into my own feelings, and what is pulling those levers of those feelings in the first place.
So this is an interesting question. So just for context, we're in the office, right in the smack dab in the middle of New York City, right?
Mm-hmm.
So in a place that's so much stimulation, like there's a lot going on here. How can one be more introspective? It does seem like it's harder in a big city like New York City, right? Compared to like maybe you're living in the woods in like Idaho, somewhere random, right? Where it doesn't, it seems like you can kind of like tune out a little bit more.
Sure. I think that's a great question, and something that people can do differently in their own ways. But one framework, first, one has to be or it helps to be in a certain mindset. And what I mean by that is, when you're halting, hungry, angry, lonely, tired, your capacity to be mindful, I'm going to introduce this concept, is significantly reduced. And so, uh, recognizing when you're not in that ability, in that space to be able to tune into yourself, is an important first step. So first is acknowledging, am I in a place where I can do that right now mentally? Um, uh, so to so mindfulness, um, I'll define it pretty simply. Mindfulness is about being in the moment, in the present moment, usually grounded within one's five senses in a non-judgmental way. And so what that looks like is you can do it in a variety of ways. A lot of people do it through breathing exercises, or they do it through meditation or yoga. But you can be mindful at any point, at any day in the world. All it means is being aware of what it's like to, if you're sitting in a chair, the feeling of you're sitting in a chair, what it means to taste something and to really tune into the sensations of the taste. If you're listening to things around you, just to take it in, what you're seeing. Um, and so it can be done in a variety of ways, but what it means to just kind of tune in to what's going on, kind of let thoughts go by without judging them, but just notice. And so it's really about observing without evaluating. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Okay.
I think the not evaluating part is difficult, especially as in New York City, we're surrounded by so many high achievers, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, my mindfulness, and I think it's like, and also not judging the, oh, I'm not, I was in my meditation, I was wandering too much, right? It's like, oh, I'm not doing it right.
Mm-hmm.
I have personally struggled with that, because I'm like, oh, that last time I had like an out of body experience, and like I'm like chasing that, right? So it's like, yeah, it's interesting. Mindfulness is, I feel like, a practice that you can never truly quote unquote master, right? It's like, and like, nor should we be mastering it, I guess.
Uh, about what you said though with high achievers, um, I think you know. I don't know if you've heard the expression, but comparison is the thief of joy.
Mm-hmm.
I think for so many people, it can be easy to take the step from looking at another person, admiring or being inspired by what they do, and recognizing that's something that you can do yourself, versus what it means to compare yourself to someone else. So we'll take us, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to compare myself to Shaquille O'Neal in basketball because he's a good foot and a half taller than me. Um,
Yeah,
and and that's okay.
yeah,
But if I make that the goalpost, I set myself up for failure.
yeah.
And so, really, when we're looking at another person, what we're trying to do is identify a part of ourselves that we want to connect with,
Mm.
that we want to progress in some way. And so, when we recognize that the measuring stick is not us versus them,
Mm.
but our current self
Mm.
versus a prospective future self where we can be a better version of ourselves,
Mm.
that's when we um, can shed those feelings of inadequacy
Mm.
and not feeling worthy.
Mm. It's good stuff. All right, let me just. Okay, cool. Let me